introduce myself. My name is David Miller. I'm your interlocutor or moderator or host for the conversation with Bob Murley that we'll have in a minute. Let me just make a few opening remarks, and then we'll get Bob up here to start our conversation. So I started here in Princeton in 2008 and have launched something called the Princeton University Faith and Work Initiative. We look at the intersection of different faith traditions, but also other things like sociology, psychology, the social sciences, and look at what are the deepest sources of our meaning and purpose and value, and how can they serve as a North Star or an anchor. A little bit of what we'll be talking about with Bob today. What's your North Star? So we look at that, and we do teaching, we conduct research, we have a public voice with thought leadership, and helping to take these ideas outside the ivory tower into the real world. We're a self-funding entity, and just thrilled to be here. It's great to see some current students and former students who come back today. Let me tell you, give an example of some of what we do here in the past. We've had other people, like Bob is filling this role today at reunions, who have been guests of ours, that we do this interview series. So this is Jason Garrett, no longer the head coach of the Cowboys, but of course a Princeton alum. Jack Bogle was one of my early interviewees, and just extraordinary wisdom from the man many of you will know him personally, as well as the great legacy he leaves us. Mark Allen, I'll be seeing him Monday, actually, catching up with him. And of course, Bo's gone through a tough time these past few years and still are working their way out of it. Laura Freese, many of you will know. Laura did this 1 year for reunions. And Bill Power, some of you know, where you had graduation ceremonies, you were on his field, or of course Princeton's field and Power's field. So those are some of the folks who've been there before. Oh yeah, Marianne Ott and Craig Phillip, they're also on our advisory board, as is Bob, and we're just delighted to have them. And they talked about careers as a couple and how that worked for them. So that's just a sampler, and we've had other people come who are not alumni to come and talk to my students and help say how they thread the needle, how they connect the dots between their Sabbath, if you will, and their Monday, be it Jewish or Christian or Muslim or whatever it might be. We look at these things with care and respect. So Bob, let me briefly say a word or two about you, and then I'm going to bring you up. But stay there 1 second longer. Bob, as you may know, is there's a typo up here, which he quickly told me. He's an emeritus charter trustee. Emeritus, so let's get the facts and emphasis here. I have to make sure I do this correctly, Bob. And Bob has had an extraordinary career. He'll tell us a bit about it. How many of you have worked for just one organization for 48 years? Bob is 2 people in 3 that get your company. You'll hear a little bit about it, but Bob started out First Boston, which is now we know as Credit Suisse, an extraordinary story, but we'll hear about that and whether or not he really ever wanted to go into investment banking. So what else do we know about Bob? Well, he almost went into Sorry about that, Bob. Bob does not know that these slides are about the show. This was South-Pacific, wasn't it, Bob, in high school? I think you made the right call, Bob. So here we are. Here he is, a studly young man as a rugger. You enjoyed rugby and did that for many years. Tom, are you in this picture as well? No. No, okay. You stayed out of that. I just wanted to check. And Bob, let's make sure we identify. You're the guy in those sexy shorts, right? White shorts? Yeah, that's you. All right. But then we go on. And do y'all remember your senior thesis? The Micronesian future. Political status negotiations, a dilemma for U.S. policy in the Western Pacific. And we won't go into the story, but you actually went and worked for the government and helped them write policy papers, didn't you? So it's amazing where one's senior thesis could take one in life. And I want to, this next one might be a bit emotional, Bob, so get ready for it. At the very end, as many of you have done, I suspect, you thanked your mom or your dad. And Bob will share more, but his mother played a particularly strong role in his life. And we want to honor Bob, and I bet your mom is smiling on the man you've become and the service you provide to Princeton and the world at large. Okay, so there's a merger. So he's the M&A business. I suppose I could have typed marriage, but I intentionally said merger. So Biberati families come together, of course, with the Murleys, and we're all blessed by this union. Here's a couple pictures, beginning to get the 3 kids in. Oh my gosh, the next gen Murley Tigers. Look at this. Well, here we are, looking good, Bob. Maybe. And this is probably, y'all might want to take a picture of this picture. because it's, I think, the only time I've ever seen Bob not in orange and black. Bob, with that, would you come on up and join us here? So our format here essentially is Bob and I are going to have a conversation. We've got a couple stories that we'll go into that'll address this title, Leadership in a Time of Crisis, What's Your North Star? So Bob, gosh, thank you first of all.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Well, and Mimi, thank you for a little bit of that surreptitious behind-the-scenes assistance there. So tell me, did you ever think that investment banking was your future?
No, absolutely not. I never did. In fact, I tried hard not to be an investment banker.
Yes, so tell me a bit about that.
Well, after I graduated from Princeton, I went directly out to go to business school at UCLA, and then on to Willow School of Economics and got a graduate degree. I came back and started interviewing for jobs on Wall Street. Actually, I went out to California in the summer of 1975, and I started interviewing out of season. And I really thought that, well, there was a lot of industries I was interested in. I really thought I wanted to be a bond salesman. That's what I was doing, so I wanted to be a bond salesman. So I interviewed on fixed income all over Wall Street, and Goldman Sachs had decided to come back to New York for the final round of interviews, and they were going to pay the cost of it. And I said, well, that's a great idea, and I went back to New York. But I really wanted to interview with this company called the First Boston Corporation, which I mentioned in California, that I hadn't really received yet word of whether or not I would be encouraged to come back to the final set of interviews. So I called up the head of recruiting and said, look, I'd like to come interview while I'm here in New York, but I got a problem. I said, I'm here, Goldman Sachs is paid the cost, and it just doesn't feel right for me that I would be interested in the First Boston while I'm here in, on their check. And I said, if you'll pay half the cost, I'll come over and interview. And he said, well, you can come interview, but we won't pay half the cost. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, let me think about it. I called him back an hour later and I said, look, I have a proposal for you. If you let me come and interview, if you decide at the end of my interview process you would have invited me to come back, and you pay half the cost of the trip. And if you decide you wouldn't have wanted me to come back and interview, then I'll pay half the cost and only bill.
So is that your first professional deal you closed?
And it was stupid because I had no money. I was in debt right here anyway, the next day was very funny. I went down, I interviewed, and my last interview on my last day at First Boston was with the chairman and chief executive officer of the firm, Anthony George. And he's a great guy. He was the chair of the Amherst board. He used to wear bow ties. He played the bagpipes. He used to wear kilts to the firm outings. He's just a neat guy.
Casual Fridays.
Casual Fridays. And he said to me, he said, you did great today, but I want you to come back and interview tomorrow in investment banking. I said, I can't do that. He said, well, why not? I said, well, I've been told if you want to work on Wall Street, you got to know what you want to do and why you want to do it. And I've been telling everybody I want to be a bond salesman. I think I'll look really silly coming in here tomorrow and interviewing investment banking. He said, you'll be fine, we'll see you tomorrow.
Well, I gotta say one thing about you, just here, is your candor. Most people, first of all, they would have tried to milk the flight and wouldn't have even disclosed that they were doing 2 trips on someone else's vehicle. Yeah. And here, it's almost like you're downselling yourself.
It was a bit of an ethical dilemma, but I felt it was just the right thing to do. But I'll never forget, I decided, I came back the next day, and I run out of clean shirts. I borrowed a shirt from a buddy of mine. It would happen to be the same size, but it had his initials on it. So I walked into the room, I was sitting with the head of investment banking. He says, first thing he says was, it's the middle of summer, I'm wearing a herringbone wool suit. It's hot like today. And he says, take off your coat, it's hot. And I said, I can't. He said, why not? I said, because I'm wearing a shirt that has initials that don't match my name.
Identity theft.
And then he looks at him and he says, so you want to be an investment banker? I said, no. I want to sell bonds. He said, well, why are you here? I said, I don't really know. You should ask me. That's the way the whole day went, one after another. And I got back at the end of the day, I went back to George's office. I love this guy. He said, you did great today. I said, you did great. Mr. Shin, I told everybody I didn't want the job. He says, I know. But then he asked me a very interesting question, very profound question. He says, were you interested in what you learned? And I said, yes, I was very interested, but I don't know how to think about that because I've only been interviewing for 8 hours. And he says, well, I have an idea. He says, I don't know if we've ever done this, but we're going to give you an offer on both sides of the firm. We'll give you an offer in sales and trading, we'll give you an offer in investment banking, we'll put you through a longer than normal training program. At the end of it, you can make the call whether or not you want to be an investment banker or a bond sale. I said, how's that sound? I said, that's a very generous offer. He said, well, you accept? I said, I do. And he says, good. And then I'm going to get up to leave. He says, I got one more question for you, young man. I said, what's that, sir? He says, you know, other than a few menial summer jobs, you've never really had a real job in your life. How the heck do you know what you want to do anyway? I said, Mr. Shin, I don't have a good answer for you. I'm not even going to try to make one up. And he looked at me, so I said, we're going to get along just fine. He was actually a mentor of mine for all these years, and I'm very proud to be able to say, not honored, actually, this is the right word. Yeah. When he passed away at the age of 93, I had the great privilege of giving him a eulogy.
That speaks volumes. That speaks volumes. Bob, you've had a few people influence your life. Let's go back and roll the time machine back. Even though you're young, you're in first grade, and as you begin growing, you get a little older. Tell us, did you know Princeton existed? Was that like your dream? A lot of folks today, their dream is they want to go to Princeton.
I appreciate you bringing it up. My first exposure to Princeton was in the first grade, actually. And my closest friend in those days was Tom Robertson, who's sitting right here.
Woohoo! Let's give it up for Tom, all right?
Tom and I ultimately became classmates and roommates here at Princeton. Okay? But the story was that Tom's father was in class in 1947, and he used to teach his kids to growl like tigers before they could even say and he used to regale us with stories about this magical place in New Jersey that I had never heard, never seen.
Because you were in California, right?
I was in California, and we were born and raised in San Marino, just outside Pasadena. And his mother knew a lot about Princeton too, because her maiden name was Cleveland, as in Rose. And a long family history here. Anyway, so in sixth grade, my father passed away very sadly and very unexpectedly. And Mom was left raising three of us on a teacher's salary. Very tough time. And I had just entered the Boy Scouts, and I was a tenderfoot scout. I was going to drop out of the troop. And some fathers in the troop came over and said, we want you to stay, we'll be your surrogate dads. And it was really wonderful. And one of them was a man named Holman Grigsby. He had his son Bruce and I were friends. He had a ranch in Durango, Colorado on the Pine River. And he asked me to come out and work there 7th and 8th grade summers, so I did, and he taught me how to fly fish. And I remember going down by the stream in the evenings, and there was a gentleman who was staying on the ranch below ours. He was sitting on the porch, and we just struck it up. We struck up conversations, and he was there for both summers, and I had many long conversations. As it turned out, he was the chief scout delegate to the United States. He was traveling all over the world representing the Boy Scouts, and I was in the process of trying to become an Eagle Scout. And we had a lot to talk about. And then I came back. We communicated by letter until my junior year in high school, and he passed away. He lived in St. Louis. And it was in that year that my mother had a young boy in her class named David McCarthy. He was a precocious, smart, but really precocious and very typical kid. Mom, teacher, she really straightened him out. His father was the head of the schools committee in Southern California for Princeton. He encouraged me to apply, which didn't take much to do. So anyway, I applied to two schools. I applied to Princeton, because I heard great things, and I applied to the University of Southern California. When the admissions came out on April 15th, I remember David McCarthy coming to our house, and he says, congratulations, you've been admitted. I said, well, I'm very grateful, can afford to go. He goes, yes, you can. Princeton's going to give you a loan and a scholarship and a job to enable you to attend. And then he said something I'll never forget. He said, it's all been made possible by the generosity of thousands of alumni looking for you. And I said, if I go there, I want to be one of those guys. And I turned to my mom. I said, Mom, what do you think? Because leaving her in Southern California was a hard decision. And she looked at me. She so valued education. She looked at me and said, Bob, you need to go to Princeton. It's going to transform your life, and it's going to change the course of our family's history, which is a big statement. And she was right. And I'll never forget getting on the, anyway, and then we finished that and then I turned to Dave and said I was happy to accept, and I'm looking forward to going. He's getting ready to leave, and he said, I got a question for you. I said, what's that? He said, you ever heard of a guy named Gil Johnston? I said, well, yeah.
This is back in the
He's the guy that I met on the stream on my 7th and 8th grade summer in Durango, Colorado. He said he died last year. He's involved with Boy Scouts. Why he asked? He said, well, apparently there were 2 files started on me. One was started in your senior year when you applied, but the other was started by Gail. He wrote a letter of recommendation for you. It's been on file since you were a freshman in high school. Not only had David Gail Johnson gone to Princeton, he was in the class of 1924, but many years he worked in the admissions office, and he spent his later years devoted to the Boy Scouts and also to identifying young men that he thought would be candidates to go to Princeton.
Talk about a living example of the importance of mentoring.
Oh boy, and I'll never forget my mom. You mentioned her, that was a very emotional statement you put up there. When I was getting ready to get on the plane, I was going to Princeton sight unseen in that fall of 1960, and I'm getting on the plane, she looks at it, she goes, "You remember who you are and whose you are." Spoke volumes about the importance of roots and eyes on the horizon, feet on the ground.
That's great, Bob. That's great. You know, let's fast.
Thank you, Tom, for introducing me to Princeton.
Your dad was what, 47?
Yeah.
Wow,
47.
Thank you, Ambassador. That's great. So let's fast forward. Some of you know, or maybe deduce, Bob sits on several boards of publicly traded companies, several nonprofits from a whole range. You're on the UCLA Anderson Business School board. You're on several public boards. I want you to talk a bit about some crisis leadership situations you've faced in the nonprofit sector and in the for-profit, and each have a slightly different theme as we've talked about them over the years. So could you start first with Stereocycle? Tell us about, first maybe describe in a word what the company is. It's not a household name.
Stereocycle is a publicly traded company based in Chicago. They have they're the largest provider of medical waste services, mostly for hospitals. You go to a hospital, red boxes on the wall. That's Stereocycle. And they also have a document destruction business and the secure documents, like what Iron Mountain does. So those are the 2 businesses. I got invited to join the board about 5 years ago, and I did it because I know a couple of board members really well. I really like and trust them. I didn't know that much about the company. I knew they were having challenges, but I agreed to do it because I wanted to be helpful. And anyway, literally with about 2 weeks after I joined the board, we got hit with this lawsuit, class action lawsuit. We were charging more of the contracts than were permitted. It was about a couple months later that there was a whistleblower that said there was FCPA or Foreign Corrupt Practices violations down in Latin America. It was a few months later that the auditors called and said we had material weaknesses, they couldn't give us an opinion. And then we had a situation where the chief financial officer informed the board that we were soon going to be in violation of our debt covenants, and we were going to have to figure out a way to get the covenant.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you enjoy the play?
In the meantime, the stock was coming down. The earnings were not meeting expectations for several quarters, and we had a real mess on our hands. And it was and a lot of the shareholders were demanding major changes in leadership of the company, refreshing the board. They wanted to vote against every board member except me and one other person, who were the only 2 that had just joined the board.
Fresh blood.
And so
I think this qualifies for it as a crisis board.
It was a bit of a. So they asked me, after I'd only been on the board for like 18 months, to become chair and lead director. I initially thought, I don't really want to do this. But I don't know, I'm just not a person who tends to run from the fire. I tend to run to it and try to put it out.
Yeah.
Right? That's just who I am.
So I'm going to interrupt you a second. I have a nickname for Bob, as we've gotten to know each other over the years, and the nickname is it's Esther. So if I subconsciously just say, so Esther, tell me about X, you might be like, why do I call him Esther? Some of you will know it's if you go back to the Hebrew scriptures, there's a book called Esther. And there's this great line in the story where she has to confront the powerful king at the risk of her life to save the Jewish people who are about all to be executed. It's kind of a summary of an incredible book. And there's this great line where her uncle Mordecai is encouraging her to go do this, and he says, perhaps for such a time as this, you have been born. Bob, you've got a lot of Esther moments in your life.
I've never thought of myself as royalty, and certainly not a queen.
Which was possible, we just wasted. No. So, Bob, so Esther, yeah, tell us, You're now lead
So
director.
so, you know, we had to move very quickly and develop an action plan. So it's all the obvious things you have to do, but you got to figure it out. And, you know, it was, you know, one, you know, really getting a law, moving to a resolution on the class action lawsuit, doing a very detailed investigation through the audit committee of what was going on in Latin America. My view wasn't in the FCPA, if you can't do business profitably and ethically, you ought not to be there. Get out, you get rid of it. And, you know, then we had to refinance the balance sheet. I had to tell 5 of the 10 board members that they had to step down and couldn't stand for re-election. Then we had to repopulate the board with a whole new, we were an all-male board, and many board members have been there for years. We didn't have diversity, and now we're a model of diversity on the board.
Terrific.
But, you know, we had to work through the issues of mature weaknesses, but that meant we had to put in a new ERP system. They always tend to take longer and cost more than you'd expect. And which this did too. That's like trying to change a wheel on a car when it's moved. We put on an ERP system. Anyway, and we had to deal with, you know, I had to go out and meet with all the shareholders one-on-one, and you know, for 2 years in a row, the top 20 shareholders, and met with them and told them what our plans were. We had to launch a search for a new CEO, a new CFO, and a couple other, you know, significant leaders in the firm. And it was just a whole host of things that really had to be done. The market started to respond well, and then we had this guy showed up. It really made me mad. I don't get mad very often. It really ticked me off. It was a guy who wanted to launch a proxy fight, and he showed up on the doorstep. He only had a couple %. It wasn't very big, and I decided I was just going to go see him in New York. I got on a plane and flew to New York. And
Did you split the cost of the flight with him?
I should have charged him for sure. Actually, I saved him a lot of money, and I'll tell you how. And anyway, I got there and I said, look, what is it that you want us to do? And he laid out all this stuff. I said, you know, everything that you're suggesting we do, either we've already done or we're in the process of doing, I'm not going to give you credit for that. That's not right. And I said, you know, you can launch your proxy fight if you want. That's fine. Go ahead. But we're going to fight, and you're going to lose, and it's going to cost you some money. And then I said something that was actually turned out to be pretty helpful as I'm walking. I said, by the way, you know, you mentioned that you're such a constructive member of these boards, and you're so helpful. But, you know, there are 2 public companies in Chicago that I know you're on the board of. And I know the CEOs and the lead directors of both those companies really well. I just want you to know that as soon as I arrive back home in Chicago tomorrow, I'm going to call them and get a report card on you and see what they have to say about your participation on the board. And just find out how constructive you really are. And anyway, so I went to the airport, I got on the plane. By the time I landed, there was a voicemail on my cell phone saying, listen, we've been thinking about this. We're not going to launch the project. You guys are doing all the right things. Good luck. You know, and he sit down. But gosh, it was just angry at him because it just wasn't right.
But Bob, you know what I hear is a theme, and this is sort of a theme of fiduciary duty, because it's fiduciary
duty. You have to do the right things.
And you methodically did all the right things.
And it was painful going through it, but you have to do the right thing for the right reasons and make the hard decisions.
So Bob, let's go to another leadership in a crisis thing, but let's go to a totally different domain. So here you had a publicly traded company that did just about everything wrong that it had to recover from, that you helped lead with the team through it. Let's go to church life. So church is a big part of your life, your faith, and even your mom, when she said, and remember whose you are, she didn't mean her, she meant the Lord or God. That was the subtle difference in that statement. So you're in the Episcopal Church, where you are at the Church of the Holy Spirit. There's something called a vestry, for those of you who don't know. Essentially, it's the governance of the institution. The lay leaders help make decisions, adjudicate how the church is going to be run. Tell us a bit about that experience, where you had again a leadership crisis.
This process was all about discernment. Okay. And I didn't know that word before until Eve told me. She said, you think you're in charge of this committee, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, if I'm not, who is she? She goes, God. Anyway, to step back, what really happened was about 5 years ago, something like that, we had a rector of our church who was failing. He was not inspiring people from the pulpit, nor was he really related to the parishioners. People got declining attendance, declining stewardship. it was just not going well. And one, I was now on the vestry. I had not been on the search to select him, but I went to the, I sat in the front of the church and watched people leave one after he'd been there about 6 months. And they weren't going down the center aisle to go see the rector. They were going out either the left door to go to the parking lot, or going out the right door to go get coffee. But they weren't looking to talk to the rector. I said, this is not really feeling good. And I went to the vestry and I said, I think we need to ask him to leave. If this continues on, we're not going to have a church. And so, you know, no good deed goes unpunished. They finally agreed about it. I was a lone voice in the wilderness for a number of months, but then about 6 months later, the vestry also agreed, and we asked them to leave. And then they asked me to be the head of the search committee, and I was really fearful of it. I've been on the last two presidential search committees here at Princeton for the last two presidents. I've been on other search committees, and I got a lot of experience. I was very fearful about this, because when you're picking someone to lead a church, it's involved baptizing children, weddings are major events in your life, spiritual counseling, it's a big deal. And I was nervous, so I agreed to do it. I had 70 people volunteer to be on the search committee. I think 14, actually I tried to do 12 on the theory, it's good enough for Jesus. 12
disciples.
And so we ended up with 14. And I convened him and I said, look, couple things. We're not going to do it the way we did it last time, where we just sent out applications, see who turns out. The person we're looking for is not looking for a job right now, but they will be after they talk to us. Okay, we're going to go figure this out. And I said, and we got a real problem with the narrative here, because how are we going to explain to people how we fire a priest? That's a really serious thing, and people are going to be very hesitant. So I'll take responsibility for building the pool. So we sent out the parish profile, and 25 directors applied. Some of them were very good, but the most important thing, we ended up reaching out to the heads of these theological seminaries. I called all the main ones, 5 or 6 Episcopal theological seminaries. Right. I told them our service. I said, can you give me some recommendations? Well, they came up with about 50 names for me. It was really great. And
so essentially, you asked them, who's the superstars?
Yeah. And so then I told Mimi that I was going to go up to our lake home up, that's where that picture was taken, up on home on Lake Winnipesaukee. And I said, I'm going to go a week earlier, and I'm going to isolate myself. I'm going to call every one of those guys. Happened to be, well, there were some women too, guys and girls. And I did. I called each one, and 25 of them ended up applying, in addition to the 25 who applied. So we now have a pool of 50. And it was a pretty darn good pool. But there was one person who I had heard about, 3 of the 5 leaders of theological seminaries. There's this guy down in Abilene, you really need to talk to. His name's Luke Back. I love his email. His email address is write Luke Back. very clever. And so I had been talking, and we had 3 or 4 conversations. I tried to persuade him. They said, everyone said the same thing. He will never leave Abilene. He was born and raised down there. His wife's from there. He married the same church where he's now the rector. He'll never, but if he ever would, just discontinue your search and hire him. So I kept calling. And finally, we were about a week before we closed down the process. I called him and I said, Luke, it's me again, Bob. I'm back. I said,
he's back. You're Murley.
I said, we have a problem. He said, we do? I said, we do. He said, what's the problem? I said, well, the problem is, Luke, that I know that God's not telling you that we're the right church for you, but God's telling me that you're the right guy for us. So one of us has got this wrong. We need to come to Lake Forest, and we need to figure this out. And I said, well, and is there anything that we can do for you that maybe isn't working out so well down there? And he said, well, there are 2 things. That I haven't wanted to admit this to you because you're pretty persistent. But my wife, Mary, would actually like to see a different part of the country before we ultimately go back to maybe Abilene. I said, Jack, we can do that. And I said, what else? He says, education. And he said, we got 3 really brilliant, capable children who are in schools that we're uncomfortable with. And I'm worried about their future. So I said, look, we've got great public and private schools here at Lake Forest, Illinois. And you ought to come on up. And then I immediately called up this one fun comment, this is a real God-siding moment. I called up the head of the Lake Forest Country Day School, where me and I both are very deeply involved in our kids went there. I called him, I said, look, we have someone who I think could be the next rector of our church coming up here. Are there any spots available in the day school? He said, well, what age is the kid? Well, 2 twin boys in 6th grade, a girl in 7th grade. He says, the long moment, he says, well, we're full, but I got 2 spots in 6th grade and 1 in 7th grade. And I'm going to hold them open until you figure out whether or not you're going to call me. I said, what about financial aid? They said, well, they can't afford it, the private schools. He said, we have a great financial aid program for children of clergy and military. And he said, I think we could do full scholarship.
Wow.
So I called him up, and he come up here, he came up, and they fell in love with Lake Forest, they fell in love with these, he accepted the job, our church is thriving. It's just, I can't tell you how good it is, and not most important.
I think I know where you're going.
Sideline. Their daughter, who is now a rising senior at Lake Forest High School, is tops in her class, perfect grades, sports scores. She's really something, really natural. Guess where she wants to go to college? She wants to be a Tiger.
No, that's great. It's terrific. It's terrific.
Yeah.
Yes, and of course that story happened in your church. It could have been a synagogue. It could have been any sort of religious worship community, congregation. And of course the governance, the polity is different in every tradition. But I've never heard of anyone doing what you did. It doesn't surprise me that you, through your discernment, you also broke some boundaries. You didn't do things the traditional way.
It just seemed intuitive.
Yeah.
It just seemed like the right thing to do. And it was very painful having to go through the process of letting a record grow. And I don't mean to make an analogy to business, because I know business is not like a church, not like a business. But honestly, if you've made a poor hiring decision, it's pretty obvious it's not going to work out. You're so better off making a decision quickly and moving on. It's best for all parties involved. And that's hard to do, but it has to be done compassionately and thoughtfully.
Well, oftentimes religious or even just any philanthropic organization, it's hard to make the hard decisions. There's a niceness and a courtesy which often hurts the organization. Well, let's shift to another one. So we've looked at crisis with fiduciary situations, a crisis in the discernment community. Could you talk a bit about Aon? So you're Bob in his role as a senior advisor on behalf of Credit Suisse for John Deere, for Cargill, for Ford. I mean, sort of all the big players, and they trust you. Like at the end of the day, it's not. Don't take this the wrong way. It's not because you're the smartest guy in the room. But you're one of them. But that's not why they go to you, Bob. They go for other reasons. Would you tell a little bit about your relationship with Aon?
Yeah, sure. I worked with Aon for a long time and worked a lot of major companies, mostly in Chicago, and you were right, some others too. But about 3 years ago, I've represented Aon in just about everything they've done.
Would you describe Aon in a word like you did Stereocycle? What's their business for those who don't
know?
know?
Reinsurance business, and they have risk management. They are their competitors are people like Willow and Raj McLennan and things. Okay.
I think about 40,000 employees.
Bigger than that. I think it's a little bit larger.
Okay.
But it's a great company. And about 3 years ago, the CEO, I'm very close to a person professionally, called me and said, we would like to make a proposal. We're going to make a proposal to acquire Willis, the major competitor. And we're going to do it as a merger of equals, which means there wouldn't be a premium for a change of control. Translate as a merger of equals with no premium. And he had been talking with their CEO, who they didn't have a successor at Willis. They needed somebody to run the combined organization. And Greg was CEO of Aon, was considered to be the best in the industry. And he said, we'd like to engage your firm and you personally to handle it. We're gonna since it's an $80 billion merger, it's a big one. we're gonna have co-advisors and leave it together. So we marched down the road together for a number of months, and we were within probably a month or so coming to final agreement of negotiations. And it was a really tough market. And all of a sudden there was a leak in the market. Mm-hmm. And the market assumed that it was going to be a premium for change of control, and it wasn't. It was going to be a merger of equals, no premium. And so Willow's stock took off like a rocket, Aon's stock plummeted. We were and because Willis was an Irish company governed by Irish Takeover Code, the Irish Takeover Law, if there's a leak, you have to disclose whether or not you are in fact in negotiations or not. And if you're not, that's fine. But if you are, you have to make one of two decisions. You've either got to negotiate through the rest of the deal with in the public, with the public knowing all about it, which makes it hard to get to agreement, or you got to go pencils down, as we say, and terminate negotiations, and you can't re-engage for at least a year. And so we were in a dilemma, and frankly, the other advisor and all the lawyers and certainly Willis and their board wanted to continue to negotiate through it because lawyers get paid by the hour. Sorry that the lawyers in the room. But and investment bankers get paid by success fees, so exactly. We're highly motivated to get the
off.
But they were advising Greg not to, or to proceed to negotiate through it. He called me and said, "What do you think?" I said, "Greg, I just disagree. I know I'm the only voice who saying this to you, but I think you ought to terminate. You ought to go pencils down right now. You can come back a year later if you want to. These stocks are out of sync. They need to float back into parity with one another. And frankly, if you had to pay this kind of premium, you're never going to get shareholder approvals to vote the deal now after you got this premium in the marketplace. It's going to punish the Aon shareholders, and I'd go pencils down. I'd stop." And
let me just interrupt though, but for those who don't follow investment banking closely, or if it's not your space, you are kissing away millions of dollars of fees for your firm, and not to mention your own back pocket, that you would have gotten a very handsome bonus for that. That was one of the biggest deals your firm had ever looked at, if I recall.
It would have been financially rewarding, that is true.
And you, Esther, you said, don't do it.
It would have been one of the largest merger fees our firm had ever paid.
Yeah.
But anyway, but that's not the point. It wasn't the right decision. It wasn't the right advice for the client. And some of the times you build your best relationships when you have to give advice that is the right advice that they may not want to hear, or even if it's not, particularly not in your self-interest, you give what is in their self-interest. So anyway, they walked away, and it was very disappointing. Well, then it happened again. A year later, we were within about 2 months of the anniversary of the original. They could come back and renegotiate. And Greg called me again. He says, "I've been talking, and as soon as possible after the anniversary date, we'd like to try to redo that deal. We canceled last year. But," he said, "I'm really, really worried about these. So I only want one advisor, and I want you and your firm, but I want you to restrict it to only like 3 or 4 people that could know about the firm." And we got a different set of lawyers and moved forward. And it was really, and we negotiated the transaction, and we actually announced, I'll never forget it, it was on March 9th of 2020, and on March 10th, we announced it. Announced it that morning, or that evening. I got exposed to COVID, and I got COVID for the next 2 weeks. Anyway, so we announced the transaction, then we moved down the road trying to get it approved with antitrust. And we had to go through antitrust approvals in 40 different countries. We got them all done with the exception of one. This happened to be the United States of America. And the Biden administration we tried to get the transaction done before there was a change in the administration. We weren't successful, it just takes time. And the Biden administration took a much tougher stance on antitrust, and they sued Aon, tried to sue. And again, we had a situation, what do we do? And the lawyers and others were saying, let's just fight it out in court. We thought we could win, actually. We thought the facts were on our side. But you're trying to merge 2 professional services organizations, and to be in this state of limbo, purgatory, for like 2 years, 3 years, while you're trying to get it sorted out, it just wasn't going to work.
Wasn't there also a breakup fee involved?
Oh yeah, it was big. It was $1 billion breakup fee.
So if you walked away,
they had to pay $1 billion in cash to Willis. And he said, "Bob, how do you think about that?" I said, "Well, here's how I think about it." I said, "Look, that breakup fee is a lot of money, but first of all, I think the market is going to go up substantially on the heels of the announcement of termination, because it will take pressure off your stock. I think that Willow's stock will probably go down substantially. You'll more than whatever you pay out $1 billion, you'll more than make up for the increase in your market cap. And by the way, since you'd already kind of merged and had a plan for integrating the 2 firms with senior executives, they already formed a joint executive leadership team. A lot of these people at Willis already want to come work for you, and they're probably going to, because Willis is going to be wounded in this process. And by the way, they're in the process of kind of being broken up and split apart. So I think, one, it's going to benefit your shareholders, and morally compensate. Secondly, you're going to end up with a lot of these Willis top employees who want to come work for you, and It's sad, and I'm sorry we have to do it, but my advice would be to go ahead and terminate it yet again. So twice we lost that.
So again, tens of millions.
But it was the right advice, and they did, as it turns out. Of course, Aon stock was traded up to its all-time high pretty soon thereafter. It's down now with the market. But, you know, Willow stock has come down quite a bit, and it's under a lot of pressure. About 40 or 50 of the top Willow's executives now work at Aon. But, you know.
You told the truth, as you understood it.
Well, you know, it's funny, you talk about it. I learned long ago that, well, not long, I think I learned long ago. And I think it's true in business, but I think it's true in relationships you have generally with people. I mean, if people do business and people build strong relationships with people that they like, they respect, and they trust, okay?
Like, respect, and trust.
You know, I don't think it takes long to determine whether or not you like somebody.
Right.
It takes longer to determine whether or not you respect somebody, but it takes a very longer period of time and a lot of work in interaction with someone to determine whether you trust somebody. It's a much higher standard. And I'm always reminded of one of my heroes here at Princeton, was George Schultz, class of 42. And of course, his favorite, one of his really wonderful quotes is, "Trust is the coin of the realm."
Coin of the realm.
And so I have really tried in my interactions with clients to do everything I do to try to, the goal is to make decisions and do things and give advice that build trust. Because it's hard to create, it's so easy to lose, but you've got to keep that right in the front of your mind.
Yeah. And you've also said from time to time, Bob, haven't you, that transactions flow from relationships. Businesses flow from
I've
relationships.
had a couple guiding philosophies in my career. It's very different today. I know Wall Street today is viewed as a transaction-oriented business. That's not Wall Street that I joined in the 1970s, but it's one that it is what it is. But that's not my philosophy. When I talk to the junior bankers and try to guide them and mentor them, I said, I want you to remember two things. Just remember, transactions flow from relationships. It's not the other way around. And if you serve your clients well, your own success will follow. If you keep those firmly in your mind, you will be a better banker, and you'll be trusted, and you'll have greater success. I believe that.
When you're talking about playing, it's the long game you're playing, Bob, which is part of the reason why.
Absolutely the long game.
Bob, so we've talked about fiduciary settings, we've talked about discernment settings, and here sort of truth telling, if I could put it that way, and speaking truth when it's not even in your own interest. Let's shift to something here on campus. When you were still an active trustee before becoming emeritus, you were involved with the process with the then Woodrow Wilson School, which has since, as we know, dropped the name Woodrow Wilson. It's SPIA, as we know now. Would you share a bit about that process and what you learned about process and consensus?
Yeah, I do believe that it's very important in any situation, particularly when it's charged as that, or selecting a president, or you really have to have a process and then trust the process to produce the right answer. Okay, that's kind of been my mantra. I served on and I know that this is a very controversial subject here in this room and all over the campus, but I'll just share you my own views of it.
I appreciate it, because you're right, it's an emotional one, it's an important one.
We had a wonderful committee. It was a small group of trustees. It was very diverse, both gender, race, ethnicity, and the group was led by Grant Henry in class 69, who I had great admiration for, and we're very close friends. And we went down the road talking, and we had a process.
By the way, just for clarity, this is the first decision.
This is the first. This is back in 2015, I guess.
Right.
And we went down the road, and we deliberated for 7 or 8 months before making a recommendation to the board. And we ended up, reaching out to all the constituency groups. We had open forums where people could stand up and share their views. We had private sessions with various groups on campus, faculty, administrations. We met with alumni leaders. We met with, we ended up sending out questionnaires, which had long, not the yes or no questions. You had right paragraphs expressing your view. I did insist, though, and I told her I don't want to read anything that's coming in anonymously. If someone's going to give an opinion, put their name on it, okay? It's not right. I don't want to, because then people put in more than one submission. But anyway, we got thousands of responses. And we also contacted scholars who were experts on Woodrow Wilson. We had Scott Berg sat on our committee, and he's written, of course, one of the penultimate biographies on Wilson. And we thought about it, and there were so many good arguments on both sides of the equation. But we ultimately decided to retain the name and to make that recommendation to the board. And it was, although the most important sentence in the executive summary was, although not unanimous, it was the consensus of the committee that we should retain the name. And so everyone had their own views about this, but my logic was this.
But first, had this ever come before the board? Wasn't this sort of a breaking new ground for the board? The very question, whatever building it might have.
Well, yes, but that's one of the pieces. I mean, look, we were trying to decide what recommendation to make to the board.
Right.
Okay. And my thought was that, first of all, precedent. Never in the history of Princeton had there been a name taken off a building or a scholarship or a professorship or any, without it had been confirmed by a prior board of trustees. So this is a precedent setting. Secondly, I always believe that you can't revise history, but you certainly can learn from it. That's important. And he had to give you the context of his time. Thirdly, I just never believed that by taking down names, that really didn't solve anything. It's more, to me, it's more cosmetic. We ought to be raising other names up. And I also felt that we ought to, though, be more honest about Woodrow Wilson's legacy. He did a number of very good things. Let's see, when he first Judge of the Supreme Court, he was much led women's suffrage. He was a wartime crisis leader, League of Nations. There are many good things that Woodrow Wilson did. But we should tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. We should share it all. But I also thought too, if someone is the President of the United States, Governor of the state of New Jersey, and arguably the most consequential president in Princeton's long and distinguished history, you got to have a pretty good reason not to take down that name. And if you really believe that he wasn't racist, but if you really believe that that alone is sufficient to make the decision we're making, and everything else should not be considered in the broad scheme, well, that's your view. I didn't happen to view it that way. And I also did believe, and because some people say, well, why don't we take it off one part of the, one thing, leave it on the
college
or take it off the Woodrow School. I said, that's intellectually dishonest. I personally think that, if the person is so reprehensible, so terrible, so awful, maybe the name should come off everything. I think it's kind of an all or nothing proposition. That was my view. Now, I'm sure other people in the committee didn't feel that way, but I did. But that was my logic and how I worked it through in my mind. I did share that with the committee, and the committee in the end seemed to come around. The consensus came around from that kind of view, and we made the recommendation to the board. We never took a vote at the board. We just it was an up or down vote. We didn't count votes, or we never disclosed what the results were. Just the board accepted the recommendation. And I thought we handled it well. I thought the process that we underwent was a fine process and produced the right result at the right time for the right reasons. I was disappointed when the university decided to reverse the decision. I wasn't on the board at the time, so I don't know of the process that they underwent the second time around. I have a sense that maybe it was very different from the one that we went through. The board was time shortened and very constrained, and maybe not as many issues being taken into account. But anyway, everyone has their different points of view. I'm very respectful of other people's views on this, and I know it's very difficult, and I hope I haven't offended anybody by what I've said.
Well, but I appreciate your candor, and it's a very important topic, not just here, but throughout the country as this goes on, in other countries as well. But it was interesting to hear sort of behind the curtain the process that you went through, and a reminder of the importance of process, which regardless whether the end conclusion is one you hoped for or ascribed to or not. So I appreciate that candor as well.
Bob, the subtitle of our visit here this morning is what's your North Star? What's your North Star? As you reflect, what are the things that shape and inform you, that guide you, that have helped you in these 4 or 5 leadership crisis times we've talked about, that you've turned to, whether consciously or subconsciously, to help you be the person you want to be?
Well, obviously, doing the right thing for the right reasons. But let me step back further. Some of you heard me say at the meeting, I believe that people have touchstones in their lives. Okay, they're things that ground you. They're things that give your life purpose, and they have an influence on how you allocate your time, how you think about your legacy, your heritage. And for most people, I think those touchstones are your family, your faith, your friendships, your life's work, and causes for which you have passion.
Causes for which you have passion. Interesting.
And I have many touchstones in my life. Well, one of them is Princeton. I mean, Princeton's been a touchstone for me for as long as I'm very reflective, and I guess, and here I am in my 50th reunion. It's hard to believe that 50 years later.
Congratulations.
Seems like a long day, a long time ago that I arrived on this campus, sight unseen from California. But Princeton, I realized, it was here that I received a magnificent education. It was here that I established my closest personal friendships, laid the foundation for a gratifying career. It was through Princeton I met me, so.
Well, game, set, match, right? Like everyone else.
So I have this deeply held view, and I know that this sounds like a little self-beater, but I just don't, it wouldn't matter how much time or energy or resources or advice I gave to Princeton. I couldn't possibly repay this place for what it did for me. And I believe that to the core. And I just, for me, a place like this, I've come to realize it's a place for all seasons of your life. It's a place that, if you permit it, it's going to bring you, inspiration, and, intellectual stimulation, and hope, and a lot of fun too in the process. And I've always, I've been involved as a volunteer leader at Princeton for now 45 years, and it all started when I became a class agent after my 5th reunion, after my great class of 72. Serving Princeton gives me great joy. It really does.
You just radiate. You didn't say on that, Bob. It's from your heart, obviously. Yeah. Well, Bob, you've given us.
I do want to share one thing with over here.
Please, would you do that? What is that hanging out over there, Bob? Is that? I don't think that's the 72 jacket, is it?
This is my 50th reunion 72 jacket. I love it. It's a great jacket. It's a new and improved version from our 25th. It's lighter and everything. This is also a 72 jacket here. Okay, and I think here, hold it. I'm going to put it on. So, the history behind this jacket is that this is an exact replica of the first reunions jacket that was ever worn in P-Race.
Like B first, like B
First, by the class of 1904. 1904. And the way I found it was, I went into the Princetoniana website. I found the jacket collection. And they have all these jackets, and they show every single one, okay, that's ever been worn in P-Ray. And I said, gosh, are there any that I really like? And I looked through it, and not many. And let's face it, it's a dog's breakfast, okay? I do love our jacket, but my eye honed in on this jacket. And so I went to, and I went to a tailor, Nick Hill, down on Witherspoon Street. I said, could you make me one of those? And he said, well, I can't, but I can try to find somebody who could. And so he went on this little project. It took about 2.5 years to get it done. And the cloth was woven in California, and then it was shipped to a very expert tailor. They actually had to weave. Every single stripe had to be weaved together. But it took me 1.5 years to do the project, 2 years. And I got it back, and so I just really liked it. I wanted this is really a museum piece. There's only one of these, and so you'll never see it again. So there it is.
Leave it on. There we go.
Oh, yeah, I did want. I want you to see the gold buttons that it.
Indeed.
How about these?
Pretty down. Well, look, while you're standing, I want to thank you, Bob, on behalf of all of us, students past, present, and future, alumni, and friends, for sharing pieces of your story, your incredible journey. Many things echo with me. You talked about the fiduciary responsibilities, the discernment moments, trust, and that sort of you could like people, you could respect them, but ultimately it's about trust, and that transactions come from relationships. There's so many pearls: faith, family, friendships. I thank you immensely, and well, how about we give Bob an amazing